Anyway, my name is Alan Murray. I'm Junior Murray, because my father's Gunya Murray, and I have to say that. And my mum's from Walgett, and that's Pamela Clark Murray. And my father's from Cumragunja, and his father was from Cowra. One of those things about doing introduction is you have to be reminded who you are and where you're from. And it applies to Uncle Cecil too. Before we begin, I want to do a acknowledgement of country. We know that as Wiradjuri people, is that this is not our lands, but we've come into these lands. We've come into these lands for different reasons, and we've come to believe that we could say that this is Wiradjuri lands. Because we know in my heart, in other hearts of other Wiradjuri people, we know that we've come here, we've settled here, and the block has been important to us. When it comes to activism and about this important place, Redfern, we know that, and we've got an elder here, and that's Paul Coe, who took on the British, took on the Redcoats, took on the federal government about sovereignty for this country. Like Uncle Cecil, and also the descendants of the KPH, Kinchler Boys Home, and their descendants. Whether you were there, or like myself, a descendant, but KPH and I suppose what happens is with fellowship, understanding fellowship, mateship, we know that mateship is a white word, but as part of our identity, we know that this area where Uncle Cecil grew up, where he came, and also started a family, we want to honour him and acknowledge where Uncle Cecil has come from as the heart of Wiradjuri country, and that was Cowra. Also, we have to acknowledge, and I do this as a claimer, is that we're on Gadigal land, and we also note that we respect our elders past and present and future. We know that KPH and the Cunimundra women, they are an important essence of our life as an Aboriginal person, man or woman, girl or boy. I know that there's a song that Uncle Cecil liked, and we'll play that song.
I was in a sad and sorry state the day they brought me through that gate. I felt just like a bird in a great big cage. Then they put me in a wing where the lifers ain't their king. If you weep, you never live to see your day. Down in jail, you're good and bad. You have made sane men go mad. Some have even took their lives different times. But you won't do that to me. I'll still be sane when they set me free. And I pray to God help me keep my mind.
As part of law, I'm going to welcome Warren Roberts to come over and speak on behalf of the family.
Good afternoon, good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Warren Roberts. I'm the eldest grandson of Cecil Bowden and Elva Quinlan. I would like to begin by thanking everyone for being here today and spending time with my family to remember and honour my grandfather. Grandfather was born in Cowra on the 2nd of December 1939. He is the son of Cecil Coe and Florence Bowden. At a tender age, along with his brother Stan and sister Florence, he was taken away from their parents, family and country, sent to Belmadere Children's Home, and then at 10 years of age, grandfather was taken to Kinchela Boys' Home. A chapter of his life at Kinchela was a horrid time. Whilst grandfather's father fought in the First and Second World Wars, my grandfather did not see his father until he was 12 years of age. As grandfather remained in Kinchela until he was 18 years old. When my grandfather returned from the Second World War, he attempted to take his children home, but he was told that they had died. When grandfather left Kinchela, he met my grandmother Elva Quinlan, and they later married and had 4 children. The firstborn was Cecil Walter, deceased. Flossie, my mother, and Anthony and Gillian, deceased. My grandfather and grandmother made a home and began to raise their children in Sydney. My mum Flossie has the fondest memories of their childhood with them until her parents separated. However, my grandfather loved his children, which had no boundaries. My mother could remember one day her father was walking in the house with his brother, Uncle Stan. He had a big present, as it was Mum's birthday, although Uncle Stan thought it was Uncle Anthony's birthday, as the present was a big red car. My mother said out of all the toys she had, that red car was her favourite. Mum didn't want to share it with anyone. Grandfather and the family reaction was they thought it was funny. On another occasion, grandfather brought Uncle Anthony a Batman cape because he loved Batman and watched Batman on TV. Instead of watching where he was going, he was watching the cape fly behind him. Next minute, bang, he hits the wall. Grandfather said any other kid would cry, but Uncle Ant, he'd get back and do it again. My mother, as a child growing up, thought her father was a big, tall man, as he always had my mother on his shoulders. When my mother grew up, she realised he was short. But to my mother, he stood like a 6'4" strong black, proud man. Grandfather had a mad sense of humour, but if you crossed the line, he'd lift you. Grandfather loved his family and his mighty South Sydney Rabbitohs. Also, he loved the #1 football team, the Redfern All Blacks. My grandfather was a plumber by trade. He commenced his trade whilst attending an Aboriginal education course at Tranby. He loved his trade and applied his skill. In fact, he completed extensive plumbing work within one wing of Long Bay Jail. My grandfather had spent time in Long Bay Jail, and during this time he loved playing touch football up to he was 60 years of age. He was incarcerated for 45 years of his life, and during his time in jail my grandfather formed lifelong mates. My grandfather was employed by the Aboriginal Children's Service in Redfern office as a field officer. He would attend Bidgera Court every day, assisting and supporting young Aboriginal boys and girls. He never missed one day. He loved that job. My grandfather was also incredibly generous and spent countless hours of his own time helping his kids, Koori kids, that he met at court. Upon his retirement from the Aboriginal Children's Service, he then went on to study at Eura College, and he discovered his own creativity, his art, to allow him to reconnect to country. In conclusion, today we are here to grieve or to celebrate the life of my grandfather, and he'll be greatly missed. Everyone here loved and respected him so much. Let's not forget what he has taught us over the years and cherish all the great memories we had together. Thank you.
Auntie Anne, will you come up to the podium and say some nice words?
Thanks very much, Alan. Floss, Warren. I got to know Uncle Cecil when I was older, but I needed to share with you that the systematic and ongoing forced removal of Aboriginal children, which is cold-blooded and intentional strategy to annihilate our Aboriginal peoples on this earth. I mean, if people think that it's stopped, well, let me tell you it hasn't. And this systematic removal of the co-children by the white man began in the early 1900s, as handed down orally from my grandfather, Paul Coe Sr. And certainly there are records that reflect my grandfather's stories. It began when Uncle Cecil's dad, and his name was Cecil, but better known as Hookie, along with his brother Paul Coe, my grandfather, Paul Coe Sr., and Uncle Les Coe, the three brothers were removed and taken into and put in a home. And my gramps used to call it Canowindra, but it was Canoundra. And that was a Salvation Army kids' home. They took the three boys and placed them in that home. Then they moved the three brothers from there, and they went into, it was the home in Mittagong. So they remained there for a while, and it was that point in time when my grandfather left there and went to Bombadera Kids Home, and Uncle Hookie and Uncle Les were farmed out, you know, to properties to work as slave labour. The girls, of course, were removed as well, and the older ones slipped the hands of the welfare. Uncle Hookie, as Warren has told you, served in the First World War with his brothers. In fact, Uncle Hookie put his age up. But there were most of the co-men except Uncle Les and Gramps that went off to the war. In fact, there were 14 co-children, 2 girls and the rest were all boys. And upon Uncle Hookie's return, of course, he went looking for his children. He didn't find them. And, you know, they, when they actually took Uncle Hookie's children, they took the 3 of them, Uncle Cecil, his brother Stan, who was a baby, and their sister Florence, who I have never met. We have never met her to this day. They took those 3 children from my grandparents, from Paul's grandparents, from June's grandparents, the family members that are here. Stan was a baby, and they took the 3 of them from Paul Coe Senior and Edith Coe, my grandparents, from Irambi Mission. And heartbreakingly, at a tender age, those 3 children were then they went into Bomaderry Kids Home, never to return back to our family as children. And I got to meet Uncle Cec and Stan as I grew older when I came to Sydney. And in fact, Uncle Stan used to come to my place regularly in Dully Jewel. And what people are not aware of as well is that Uncle Stan vowed Uncle Cecil's brother, who Uncle Cecil protected beyond when he was a boy, when he was a little boy, and when they ended up taking him to Bomaderry and to Kinchela. Uncle Stan was really instrumental in establishing Link Up. He was one of the main forces that set up Link Up here in New South Wales. And he had significant input into major reports and inquiries into the stolen generations of Aboriginal children. Uncle Cecil was so proud of Uncle Stan because he travelled the breadth of this country, connecting children to their families. But Uncle Stan's passing certainly devastated Uncle Cecil. That it was even harder. You know, it was one of the hardest things that happened to him in his life because he was extremely close to his brother. And he went to great lengths to protect him. And I mean, the men in Kinchela Boys Home would recall how protective Uncle Stan was, how protective Uncle Cecil was of his brother Stan. But he couldn't save him, unfortunately, from his early passing. And all I know is that from that time on, Uncle Cecil certainly, the best mate that he had as well, and his baby brother, left a major, major gap. But I had the honour of actually working with Uncle Cecil at the Aboriginal Children's Service, and in fact, we got with Alan and the Aboriginal Legal Service and decided that we needed to, upon his parole release, get him into meaningful employment. And I tell you what, it was one of the best choices we ever made was to get Uncle Cecil working at the Aboriginal Children's Service. He never missed a day's work. And he walked every day. Every day he would walk to Bajura Children's Court. Walk there and walk back. Sometimes my daughter Yvonne would go and meet him there at Bajura and we'd pick them up from there because she went to St. Scholes School. But he certainly left his mark in that organisation, and there are a lot of children, young ones, that he worked with are certainly better for it as human beings as a result of his input. And I just wanted to share with you that he also punched the piss out of Gubbers on his way back from court, not once but twice. And the second time the police picked him up and they let him go. But the reason why he did it is that there were these non-Aboriginal people that were being very racist, and if anyone knew Uncle Cec, they certainly wouldn't want to take him on when he was, defending his honour and rights. I've got to say, when you look at Uncle Cec, he was his father to the T. He was Uncle Ookie all over. He was his dad. And from my and my sister's upbringing and Paul and them, that was our link. He was a connection. While ever Uncle Cec walked this earth, he was our link to the old people because he looked just like his dad. He was our link to Uncle Ookie. And I share with you, Uncle Ookie lived with us. He lived with us on Cara Mission. And myself and Linda and Bev and June and Betsy, we got to hear him cry over night time, believe me. He cried for his kids. And that never left him. He took that to his grave. Because when he went off to fight for this country, his country, he came back home, and the one fight that he lost was getting back his children. But one thing that I know, and we all stood proud of, is that he never ever gave up. Uncle Lookie never gave up. Sadly, it's a system that controlled and didn't want those children to come back home. You know, for our people, we're not perpetrators. Our Uncle Cecil sadly was a victim of ongoing genocide. But more importantly, my God, Uncle Cecil was a survivor. He was a true Wiradjuri warrior. He was an incredible father, a wonderful grandfather, a friend, certainly an incredible uncle that I got to spend my time with. And by God, he was a proud man that walked tall and he held his head high. But I know now and I believe that he is free from the trauma he once had carried. He is free from the behaviours of his past. For Uncle Cecil knew that protecting his hurt was important, but nothing was far more important and not as expensive as those he loved dearly. And Floss, you know my darling. Rest peacefully, my Uncle Cecil, in the dream time with your dad, your mum, your baby brother, Uncle Stan, and your beautiful children that have passed before you. Love you, may you rest peacefully.
I'll ask Paul to come up, Paul Coe.
To try and put this into perspective, I have to go back to Rambi Mission Cowra, and I have to look at the fact that generation after generation of Aboriginal men and women were taken from there. Why, for such a small mission of 300 people, you had such rage in such numbers, I don't know, and I'll never come to understand the reason why. But I do know this, that I've grown up and was part of the time when Colin, Dinky, and Isabel were taken from Mum Shell when she was looking after her sister's children. I was there when Aileen, Colin and Archie were taken. Cec was older than me by 10 years, but I do know that the three were taken from my grandfather, the man that I'm named after, Callaghan Coe, Paul Coe, and they all suffered the same problem of being trenched off to a white institution, separated from family, separated from culture, separated from language, to become what? I don't know. But this was part of the mystery of this white Australia, that somehow or other had to change the Aboriginal people, to change our culture, to change our law, to change who and what we are as people into something that they wanted to invent. But I don't think they broke these people. Colin and Dinky, when I came to Sydney, I finished my schooling, they were still the same. Archie was still going backwards and forwards between Cowra and in and out of jail. All of the Perry kids were doing the same. So the system didn't break them. So what does it say about Australia? Why did they have this system of taking away children from their families, from their culture, their language, and the place where they felt safe? Why? To what end? To what purpose? I don't know the answer, but I do know this. That policy, that strategy is still in place today. It's been going as long as Cook placed the English flag on our shores without our consent. They still think that they are the masters of the universe, that they can treat everyone like shit. But when you meet someone like Cecil and you talk to him, he used to always tell me to go and get fucked. You know, he sort of looked at me like I was privileged. I think, you know, maybe I am. I finished school. I went to university. But I still respected him. And I went to him for advice. But when it all came down to it, what the white Australian people do not understand is when these children were taken away from the missions, it wasn't just the child being taken away, it was the fact that the community had lost members of their community. Ones who were participating, ones who were involved, and all of a sudden they were no longer there. So the community as a whole suffered. Every child that was taken away brought about suffering on those who were left behind. They carried the suffering just as well as the little ones who were taken away. Now, whether this is a crime of genocide, I don't know. Whether this is a crime of the stupidity of Christianity, I don't know. But I do know this, they evil bastards. Thank you.
A person who has been appointed by the Queen, and when she's no longer Her Excellency of New South Wales, but I just want to introduce Professor MerJa.
Thank you, dear Alan. And let me say with the deepest respect and sincerity in my heart, what a privilege, a deeply felt privilege it is to be with you all here this afternoon, though it's a reason of great sadness that brings us all together. So, dear Alan Murray, Warren Roberts, who is connected to some of the members of his family who are the dearest figures in my long life. Dear Anne Weldon, Paul Coe, and those of you who are survivors, heroes, I might add, from the Kinchela Boys' Home experience. All of you together, dear friends, we're drawn together in admiration and gratitude, love and respect for an outstanding and unforgettable man, Uncle Cecil Barden. And you might say, well, what's this girl going on like that for? I had many, many privileges. One was being born in Wiradjuri land, and at the outset I should pay my deep and sincere respects to the land, the custodians of the land where we now are gathered, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But I was born and grew up on Wiradjuri Narandra, where there was, it's been researched, enormous harmony between the first Australians and the boat people of nothing more than 200 or so years. And coming to Sydney to go to school at Moore Park, my mother's old school. I lived with my grandmother in Redfern, would you believe it? So I had a combination of Narandra and Redfern, which certainly was very dear to my heart. And I used to do, after I graduated in medicine, clinics at the Aboriginal Medical Service, and that's where I first met Uncle Cecil and a lot of the wonderful people who live, but those also who worked in the Aboriginal and the legal service as well as the Aboriginal Medical Service. And I feel it's one of the greatest privileges of my life that I was treated as an adopted daughter, one might say, but someone who could learn at their knees, learn at their feet, and learn so much wisdom. So I'd like to thank Alan Murray, Warren Roberts, Anne Weldon and Paul Coe, and all the leaders, all of the wonderful people in this community and beyond across our country. You've probably heard it many times. The longest living civilization on the planet Earth. And that's been proven by carbon dating of rock art. Not just deep, deep, deep in the Blue Mountain area, but up in the Kimberley too. They brought overseas scientists in to date the carvings, the artwork there, and they didn't tell them what they'd got, and they thought it was here. And what it was discovered to be was 60,000 years, which is really unbelievable. Nothing across the earth has been discovered as old as that. And as a child growing up in Narandra with my beloved Wiradjuri friends too, I learned so much from them. Harmony, how to keep away from snakes without having to kill them, and all sorts of wonderful aspects of wisdom. But certainly the great privilege was later, after doing medicine, was being allowed by Naomi Mayers and the team at Redfern Aboriginal Service to do clinics there too, and go on learning not just about medicine but about the greatest living culture on the planet. And that's when I first got to know Uncle Cecil. And the passing of Uncle Cecil, even though he was a man of relatively senior years, is deeply felt as a personal loss. But he leaves an incredible legacy, an incredible legacy. When you think he was taken away from his family, his loved ones, at the age, it is stated, of 16 months. And I work in the field of mental health. The fact that he became so resilient, so courageous, and so able with his inner strength to give to those around him was just the picture of a most outstanding individual. So it was a true privilege to have known him, to have crossed paths with him, and to have felt too that he would never be forgotten. And this gathering today is symbolic of that. I think there are many, many, many people, perhaps hundreds, who aren't here with us this afternoon, who will carry him in their hearts for the whole of their lives. Certainly I shall, and be grateful to the dignity and the wisdom that was innate with him. It was only a couple of years ago, in fact, I think his 77th birthday, when he had a most wonderful cake iced in South Sydney Rabbitoh's colours, and I had the unforgettable privilege of being asked by him to come and cut it with him. So his loss is something that is very, very personal. But the wonderful aspect is of his life is that he not only will never be forgotten by those who knew him and who will tell succeeding generations about him, but also his ethics, his bravery and what he stood for certainly will remind the non-Aboriginal people living in Australia that our longest living civilization on earth is also one of the strongest, one of the most ethical, and certainly courageous, from which we can all certainly learn. I mean, those beyond our beloved Aboriginal communities. So Uncle Cecil's family members, please know we shall never forget him, and that we will be eternally grateful to a man who led the way in so many directions. And although I'm speaking personally, I know that that will apply to many, many hundreds, if not thousands of people who crossed his path. Thank you all.
Thank you, MerJa. Thank you for those kind words. Thank you for that encouragement. Typical Wiradjuri. I'll ask for Uncle Bobby Young from the Kinchela Boys Home Corporation, and with Uncle Michael Welsh as well. He's not here. Uncle Cecil led the way for KPH, and it's fitting for the corporation to say as well.
There's a couple of things I want to talk about. I call him my brother. Brother Cec. We was all one big brothers in that boys' home, and listen to that song. It brings back a lot of memories, what we've all been through. There's one story, I don't know if he's told the family or not. We had a boiler room in the boys' home, and it was getting cemented. It was getting cemented. It was the manager's son that put his foot in the cement, and they got most of us up to put our foot into the print. Cecil, brother Cecil, foot hit the cement, printed in the foot in the cement. He got a hell of a hiding. Even if you cried, they still would have punished you. He just stood there like a man. I can say he's my legend. He just stood there and took that pain. Another couple of things, like he said, he loved his South Sydney. Remember his dog he used to have? Even that dressed his dog up in South Sydney gig and walked the street with him. The reunions we used to have in Kempsey when he was around, he used to stay with me. I was proud to stay in that same unit with him, with a legend laying next to me. He lost his wallet, but it fell down the end of the bed end, and I ended up finding and giving it back to him. And you know what he done with his wallet? He opened it up and started counting the cash. Yes, that was all there. He done the same with his coins. And again, he said, "Oh, it's all there." I said, thank you, brother. It's all there." So there's a couple of things I can talk about. Thank you.
These are the type of stories we want to be told. If you've got a story like that, please, I encourage you to go downstairs and get in front of a mic, a video, and tell the story. Like myself, you know, when I said during the proceeds some weeks ago, and I said that when I was a young boy, when he was staying with my parents at St Peter's, and woke up, and Uncle Stan were staying with my parents, but they stayed at the rear of the property or the house, and they were drinking goon, and I would have been about 10 years old, and I couldn't. That was the first time I seen red flagging. You ever seen a red flag? And it's something like today's at least 3 litres. So I cast my mind. I'm just trying to remember what he said to me. He said, "Nephew, this will be my last time I'll be drinking red wine." So to me, that was about 40 years ago. These are the stories we want to say, because we know that alcohol and domestic violence are the claimers of destruction, are the claimers for destroying families, and we know that. Can we also have Auntie Elaine up here for the Cootamundra girls? Like my father told me one day when he was taken from Cumbergunj, my father and his sister was taken away, and that was only Jane Murray, and they went to Cootamundra. So Arnie, can you please talk about your story?
My name is Elaine Randall, and I was taken away from Maclean. It was down the other side of Grafton. We were taken out of the Catholic school at Maclean by the police. Now the police did work with the department. It wasn't the department, it was the Aborigines Welfare Board back in those days. We were taken down to Maclean Police Station, charged with being neglected children. I wasn't neglected, neither was my sisters. My father was a hard-working man. He worked at the Ashby dock. They used to send the Navy boats right up the Clarence River. My father was in charge. He was the only Aboriginal man employed in that dock. So why was we taken? I am going to let the cat out of the bag. It all came from Queen Victoria in the 1800s. Now people think the Cootamundra Girls' Home was in the 1900s. No way. No. Wrong. It was in the late part of the 1800s. And that girl, the first girl, was taken from Victoria at 10 years of age, put into Cootamundra. Myself, my two sisters, my two brothers. We got sent one way and the other three brothers went the other way. Sent down to Cootamundra. I was about 9 or 10. And in the Catholic school, my education was going ahead. When I got to Cootamundra, it was a different story. All the dark-skinned girls and boys were to be removed from their parents. The girls had to be treated as maids, the boys as farm hands. Come on. The law was 14 years of age, the girls had to leave school, same as the boys, 14 years of age, no education. Trained in the home for a further 6 months, sent out in farms, out in the sticks. I had no education. I was crying, I begged matron. All I got done with was they used to use the broom handle on us girls. Hit across the back 3 times. They were very cruel to us girls. Especially the dark-skinned ones, like myself. The fair-skinned ones, they were allowed to go and get educated. When I came out of the home, I was snacked away. I had to go back home to Grafton. When I first met my mother, she didn't know me. I looked around after I got off the old train, and I seen these ladies there, and they said, "What's your name?" I told them. And they said, "Who are you looking for?" I said, "I'm looking for my mother and father." "What's your father's name and what's your mother's name?" I said, "Frank." They looked at me and they said, no, he passed away, and I didn't understand. I didn't understand that because we were never taught. And then I said, "I'm here to look for my mother. What's her name?" And I said, "Clara Randall." And they looked at me and looked, and they said, "Well, just you sit there and I'll go and get..." And when my mother seen me, she screamed. And it gave me a fright, and I was looking around, and that was the first time, but I didn't know. I was frightened. Absolutely frightened. I cried, I got a fright, and I went. And I came back to Sydney, and the only time I went back home again is when I had my first child. And then this other time, while we was in Sydney, walking up the street in Redfern there, this fella came up and he said, "Hello, young girl, how are you?" And I said, "I'm very well, thank you, how are you?" He said, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Elaine." And he said, "Well, my name is Cecil." I said, "Hello, Cecil, how are you?" And we were sitting down on the seat there talking. And I said, "Where do you come from?" He said, "I come from Cowra." "Where do you come from?" "I come from Grafton." "What's your surname?" I said, "Elaine Randall." He said, "What's your brother's name? Did you have two brothers?" I said, "Yes, Gerald and Brian." He said, "I was in Kinjala Boys' home with them." "Oh, very nice. Did you like it there?" "No. My brother, he ran away so many times there, they flogged him until he couldn't stand." Oh, gee. And years later, I started tracking down my family tree. I didn't know Neville Bonner was my brother. They took him away before they took us away, and they sent him up to Palm Island in Queensland, right out to sea from Townsville. Jimmy, Henry, and Neville Bonner were my brothers. Why did the welfare cover all this up? Why did they cover all these things up? I'm still asking myself that question, why? Because we were dark-skinned, that's why. And that came from England. If you don't believe me, you go down to the archives and you look that up. Queen Victoria. Why did they do this? What gave them birth? Who made them God? I've got so many Kinjala boys, they're my brothers, I love them all. And we always meet every now and again. Where the Kinjala boys go, they always take me and another girl. And when we're going down to Cootamundra, the Kinjala boys are going to come with us and see where your family grew up too. Sisters, cousins, it was very, very cruel, but I've got my brothers to support the Cootamundra girls and myself, and I just love them. My brothers. But Cecil Bowden was somebody special, so unique in his speech, in his manners, and his respect, which I will treasure for the rest of my days. Thank you.
The chapter is not over. because we hear from survivors and also we want to hear what happened at Bomaderry. So I'll ask Aunt to come up. Bomaderry representative.
Hi, I'm Michelle Blakeney, and my mum's sister, Christine Blakeney from Bomaderry Children's Home, couldn't be here today. She's very busy with more things to do with Bomaderry, but she's asked me to speak about Uncle Cec. I'm a photographer, for those of you that don't know me, and a filmmaker. And for many, many years I've recorded Uncle Cec and many, many stories and so many photographs. And I've always loved his honesty and his being so direct. And some of the work that I do is about telling stories in other countries. And I do that with my storytelling through photography, because I believe that the power of photography is about healing. How many great memories you can have with sharing a story. And Uncle Cec had told me many stories which I had recorded, and when I've shared those stories with other Indigenous people, especially Native Canadians, it's the same story. They connect like it's the same story. We call it here the stolen generation, but in Canada it's the survivors of residential schools. So he was so direct at times that people would get really excited, because how many times can you tell a story, but when it comes from, as they say, the horse's mouth, it was true, it was not lies. When I've shared my stories in other countries like Japan and Mexico, some people just cannot believe that it actually happened. And the photos that I show of my mum's sisters that were in Bomaderry as well, and my grandmother in Cootamundra, that they think, what, your mother's sister, your sisters, aunties? Yes. The shock for them in other countries at times is they cannot believe Australian history. So the power of storytelling is just amazing, and Uncle Cec is the heart and the biggest speaker in the stories that I've had internationally. He's given me, he gave me photographs of himself when he was young, and I'd love to share, and I have not met all of Uncle Cec's family, but I have this gift for you that he gave to me. And I too am Wiradjuri. My grandmother's from Wellington, and also Yagle. So, honey, Elaine. Yes, I'm a Blakeney as well from Maclean. But I brought with me some emu feathers that I would love to share with the family as our emus, just like Uncle Cec. They'd never walk backwards. Thank you.
I'm trying to understand, who did he love in terms of the football teams? And that's a debate I've got, and I just want to know, who did he love most? Who did he appreciate most? In what lengths did he wanted to say to the Gabars, enough is enough on the football field? I'm trying to think. I don't think he said it when it comes to the red and green. But certainly when it came to, when we wore our football jumpers, our jumpers black and white. When you see the reverse, you're seeing it this way. I'll ask Kip to come up. Keith Munro, he's going to say some delight words about Uncle Cec's involvement. I've got a lot of stories too.
Thanks, Alan. Yama Malia. My name's Keith Munro. Everyone here in the community knows me as Kip. I'd first like to acknowledge we're on Gadigal country, and also acknowledge all the people that I've looked up to in the 30 plus years that I've been here in Redfern. The Coe family, Hookie family, my cousin Willie Leslie, the Welsh family who are a big part of my upbringing on my grandmother's side, Carmine Smith, whose father took Uncle Ray in and raised him as a son with my mother and my grandmother and her older sister. But in regards to football, Al, there were two clubs in his vocabulary, two clubs that he loved. Uncle Cec was one of a kind, and you really have to put yourself in his world to, I suppose, understand the dynamic worldview that shaped his life. And we've gained an inkling of that through very personal stories that we've heard so far. But personally, when I first came down to Sydney to finish off year 11 and 12 in high school, one of my earliest memories thinking back in those times was being at the children's service and in the old George Street, the other side of Redfern Street, and Floss used to come in there and there was always a lot of coming and going and the comment and the laughs, always plenty of laughs. But hearing, I suppose, the circumstances around Uncle Cecil's life puts into perspective for me, I suppose, the way he looked at things. And I can understand now why he cherished the Redfern All Blacks so much, why he cherished the block so much, our community, and why that was so important to him and to many people that lived here, that grew up here, that worked here, that shaped the cultural renaissance that took place here in the 1970s through the establishment of the medical services, the children's services, the legal services, and the way that shaped the national discussion that set up the national bodies. And unless you understand that narrative and how that has shaped someone like Uncle Cec, and for me how that shaped me, my understanding as a younger person coming through the community and I suppose learning the type of education that we don't learn at schools. We don't learn this history in high schools, at universities. We learn this through our oral tradition of these stories being passed down to us, but also by watching. And a lot of our learning takes place by watching. And in the case of Uncle Cec, a lot of that learning took place for me by the hearing, because you'd hear Uncle Cec before you saw it, especially at Redfern All Blacks games. I still remember we had a D grade side in. It was the first D grade team that we had under 17s, and we'd rock up, and we wasn't sure how many players we'd have on any given Sunday, because some kids might be on the run from police the night before, locked up the night before, still trying to get there from the taxi, and so we'd usually start with 9 or 10 players, just enough to have the team on the field. We'd actually be winning the game at this point, but you'd always hear Uncle Cec on the sideline, top key, yelling at the ref about the unfairness of some of the decisions that he was making, giving us words of encouragement. We get to half time, we get 3 or 4 blokes come on, we'd have enough for a full team, but then we'd start losing the game, and then the cycle would repeat itself the following week. But that was our mob, that was our community, that was Redfern. And I look at, Uncle Cecil's life, and the importance of the Redfern All Blacks to him, but also I suppose I think back of why the South Sydney Rabbitohs was such an important part of his life, and like many of our people in our communities, that's completely understandable when we look at the fact that we had so many of our heroes playing in those colours, and we affiliated so strongly with that team because of the Simses, because we had our own members of our community playing with that team, and for the Redfern All Blacks, he was a former player. He played alongside some of his brothers that he was in Kinchler Boys Home with, and the legacy that those people like Uncle Cec has on someone like myself as junior convener of the club should never be understated, and it's the stories of people like Uncle Cec that is so important in handing down to not only his family members and the family members of extended family from Cara that are playing with our junior teams, but also to ensure that those stories live on through people that are building the club up. When Uncle Cec would have been playing, we would have only had maybe 3 or 4 teams playing in the comp at any one time. We're never a big club. This year we had 13 kids teams in the competition. We had 3 under 5s. The competition, our club used to start at under 6s, which is otherwise known as our nappy grade. A couple of years ago, we were forced to start an under 5s team because the majority of our kids were 5. So we said, okay, well, we can do that. This year we're only one of 2 clubs in the South Comp to have 3 under 5s teams in the comp. As I said, Uncle Cec was a one-eyed All Black supporter, and through the strength of him and the legacy that he leaves behind, certainly within the club, he'll be, sorely missed. My condolences to Floss and Warren and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I take comfort in the fact that, in Gomeroi belief, he's up there in the Sky Camp, reunited with his family and friends, and looking after us, looking over the family, and I look forward to making sure that the legacy of people like Uncle Cec lives on within the club, and it's important for me to be able to do that and ensure that continues on. I look at the gentrification that's taken place throughout Redfern, particularly over the last 18 years, and what the block had meant to people like Uncle Cec, coming from really painful circumstances that have shaped their lives, and the type of community that was developed here around that time, and the resilience of our community, the resilience of people like Uncle Cec, who was one of the most kindest people you could meet, but he hated authority, and you heard that on the football field over a weekend. But he loved his community. He loved his family. He loved his 2 football teams. And I take comfort in the fact that he's got some incredible. Warren, you're doing amazing stuff. I see that strength and resilience through you and Floss, and I just hope that he's up there resting in peace, and I'd just like to thank you all for allowing the All Blacks, the Redfern All Blacks, the opportunity to speak here in front of the family and the community again. Thank you.
Sort of imagining the emblem. There's Uncle Cec. That's in there. That's him. Our last speaker, I'll ask Jeff McMullen. Will you come up?
I really only want to share with the family and the circle of strong friends that are here what I learned from Cec, what I saw in his eyes, the strength that we all admired even when he was aging and forgetting some things was very powerful. And the fact that he did time and was punished so cruelly over and over again made him all the more an amazing man, and all the more an impressive elder who kept, in his many ways, trying to contribute to some other kid and anyone else that he could save from going down that horrible road of oppression and that authority the cruelty of authority in subjecting him to so many things. I knew about it before meeting Cec, but he had a way with his words, and I could see it in his eyes how much he'd suffered. I'll never forget that. And the gentleness in which he could describe horrific things. My mother had told my brothers and I about children being stolen from their mothers as young as Cec. I knew about that. Mum lived near a shanty at a little hill outside of Singleton, and she asked her father, why are those kids that I play with not allowed to go to the school? And her old man said, that's the way it is, and that's the way it was. She was born in 1916. And at one of the Cootamundra girls' homes gatherings, an old lady sent her granddaughter over to say to me, I used to play with your mother back in the day. So yes, I knew how many children had been stolen, how doors were closed in the institutions and the horror went on. And being a journalist, from the 60s, I travelled with so many individuals and parts of their family trying to piece together the lives and the family tree that was in some cases destroyed forever. And some of that was nightmarish. A fellow who'd come back from Britain who'd been stolen and taken there as a baby, who had an accent like he was out of Brixton. And when he came home, his family didn't want to know about him because he'd done time in jail. But Cec didn't let authority or jail or the cruelty that he suffered stop him from telling others what went on in very strong, clear terms. The story that he told about what those children, they were boys, were made to do to one another. They didn't just get flogged by authority, but the fact that the footprint story about if Cec's footprint matched the concrete, someone that had stomped on the wet concrete, the other children often were made to flog Cec or someone else. And this happened in Bomaderry, in Kinchela, in the dormitories around the country. But he went on trying to tell anyone that he thought would act the truth of things. And for decades after decades, the country didn't heed it. And when finally, very late in the lives of men like Cec, some words of an expression of sorrow were uttered, we waited still to see the real reckoning. Where was the justice that was going to be meted out for what was done? How few people in that authority that meted out the cruelty and the punishment and the pain, and in many cases murderous violence, which continues to this day. As others have said, and he was very aware of it late in his life when he would come to Murray Bashir's gathering each morning when you were in Government House, and the Kinchela boys and the Cootamundra girls and lots of others from other parts of the country were there, and he was very aware that children are still being removed. It's not over. Why do they do it? Is it the same guilt? Is it the same oppression? Is it the same injustice? It doesn't seem to have changed in that sense. But the determination that Cec had was that if you use that voice, that same rowdy voice that you heard at the football game, he measured his words. I thought he measured them beautifully. He was, for all that had been done to him, there was a gentleness about him that was truly unforgettable. He was a beautiful man. And my sorrow to all of the family and all of you that have lost him.
With that ends the proceedings. Thank you very much for coming on behalf of Floss and Warren and the family. Thank you very much for this gathering. Thank you for recognising a genuine elder, Uncle Cec Bowden. Thank you.